She was 7 years old when she learned how to disappear. Her name was Anya, and she lived in a coastal village in what is now Ireland in the year 841 AD. Her mother woke her before dawn, pressed a finger to her lips, and whispered a single word: Vikings. Anya's heart stopped. She had heard the stories. She knew what happened to children when the longships came. But her mother did not cry. She did not panic. She took Anya's hand, led her to the back of their small stone cottage, lifted a wooden board from the floor, and pointed down into the darkness. "Get in," her mother said. "Do not make a sound. Do not come out until I tell you, no matter what you hear." Anya climbed down into the cramped, cold space beneath the floor. Her mother replaced the board. And the last thing Anya saw before the world went black was her mother's face, calm and fierce, lit by the dim glow of a single candle. This is not the history they teach in schools. This is not the story of kings and warriors. This is the untold account of women and children who faced Viking raids with no armor, no weapons, no armies to protect them. These were mothers and daughters, sisters and wives, who survived not through strength, but through courage, through cunning, through an instinct to protect life at any cost. And their stories, buried for over 1,000 years, are some of the most powerful examples of human resilience ever recorded. Welcome to English Mindset, where we uncover the voices history silenced, the moments that reveal what people are truly capable of when survival is the only option. Today, we step into the Viking Age through the eyes of the most vulnerable, the women and children who were targeted, hunted, enslaved, and who, against all odds, found ways to endure. If you have ever wondered what real courage looks like, if you have ever asked yourself what you would do to protect the ones you love, stay with me, because these stories will break your heart and rebuild it stronger. The Viking Age, from roughly 793 to 1066 AD, was a period of terror for much of Europe. Norse raiders struck without warning, targeting monasteries, villages, and towns along coastlines and rivers. They came for treasure, for food, and for people. Women and children were valuable commodities. Women could be enslaved, sold, or forced into marriage. Children could be raised as slaves or traded for profit. The historical records, written mostly by monks and chroniclers, focus on the violence, the destruction, the battles. But they rarely mention what happened to the women and children left behind. And when they do, it is only in passing, as footnotes, as nameless victims. But oral traditions, archaeological evidence, and a few rare written accounts tell a different story. They tell of women who became leaders in the absence of men. They tell of mothers who hid their children in unimaginable places. They tell of girls who disguised themselves as boys. They tell of children who were taught to survive in ways that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. These are not stories of helplessness. These are stories of adaptation, of sacrifice, of a fierce determination to live. Anya, the girl hiding beneath the floor, stayed in that dark space for 6 hours. She heard footsteps above her. She heard men's voices, rough and foreign. She heard furniture being overturned, pottery smashing, her mother speaking in a language Anya did not understand. And then she heard silence. A long, terrible silence. She waited, as her mother had told her. She did not move. She did not cry out. And when the board was finally lifted, it was not her mother's face she saw. It was her grandmother, old and trembling, tears streaming down her face. Her mother was gone, taken. Anya never saw her again. This was the reality for thousands of women during the Viking Age. They were taken from their homes, separated from their families, and transported to distant lands where they were sold into slavery or forced into new lives. Some adapted, some resisted, some found ways to escape, and some, like Anya's mother, made the ultimate sacrifice to protect their children, knowing they would likely never return. If this story is gripping you, if you are feeling the weight of what these women and children endured, then let me ask you to do something. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, if you think history should honor not just the warriors, but the survivors, hit the like button. Not for me, but for them. And if you want to keep uncovering the forgotten truths of the past, subscribe to English Mindset and turn on notifications, because we are just beginning. One of the most common survival strategies for women was hiding. When the warning came, when the bells rang or the signal fires lit, women grabbed their children and ran. Not to the forests where Vikings often hunted, but to places the raiders would not think to look. Underground chambers called souterrains, hidden caves, marshes and bogs where the ground was too unstable for armed men to follow. Wells that had been dug deep enough to climb into. Even animal pens where women and children covered themselves in mud and straw and lay among the livestock, hoping the Vikings would not look twice. In one account from the Irish annals, a woman named Miriam hid herself and her 3 children inside a hollow oak tree for an entire day, while Vikings ransacked her village. The space was so small that they could barely breathe. Her youngest child, a boy of 4, began to cry. Miriam covered his mouth with her hand, pressing hard, knowing that one sound could mean death for all of them. The boy went silent. And when they finally emerged hours later, the village was destroyed. But they were alive. Miriam's husband had been killed. Her home was burned, but her children survived. And she rebuilt, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. Another strategy was disguise. In some communities, mothers cut their daughters' hair short and dressed them as boys, hoping the Vikings would overlook them. Viking raiders often targeted young women and girls for slavery, but boys, especially young ones, were sometimes ignored or killed outright. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to make daughters invisible, and in some cases it worked. There is a recorded story from the Hebrides Islands of a girl named Fiona who was disguised as a boy by her mother. When the Vikings came, they took several women from the village but left the boys behind. Fiona lived as a boy for over a year, cutting wood, fishing, doing the work of men, until the threat passed. When she finally returned to her female identity, she was changed. The experience had hardened her, aged her, given her a resilience that she would carry for the rest of her life. But not every disguise worked, not every hiding place held, and not every mother could save her children. The historical record is full of heartbreak, of women who watched their children taken, of mothers who were separated and never reunited. These stories are hard to tell. They are hard to hear, but they are true, and they matter. Children, too, had their own survival strategies. In villages that were raided repeatedly, children were taught from a very young age how to hide, how to stay silent, how to recognize danger. They were drilled like soldiers, but with tears instead of commands. Parents would conduct practice drills, hiding children in cellars, under floors, in barrels, timing how long they could stay quiet. It was traumatic. It was necessary, and it saved lives. One archaeological discovery in Norway uncovered a small underground chamber beneath a farmhouse. Inside were the remains of 3 children, huddled together, along with a wooden toy and a small clay cup. Historians believe they were hiding during a raid and were either forgotten, trapped, or simply too afraid to come out. They died there, in the dark, waiting for a rescue that never came. It is one of the most haunting finds in Viking Age archaeology, a silent testament to the terror that children lived through. But there were also stories of incredible bravery. In one account from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a 10-year-old girl named Edgith led a group of younger children to safety during a raid. While the adults fought or hid, Edgith took charge. She knew the land. She knew where the Vikings would go. and she led the children through a narrow ravine, across a stream, and into a cave that only locals knew about. They stayed there for 2 days, hungry and cold, but alive. When they finally returned, the village was destroyed, but the children were safe. Edgith grew up to become a healer, a respected woman in her community, and she never forgot the day she became a leader at 10 years old. Let me ask you something. What do you think it takes for a child to make those kinds of decisions? To lead, to protect, to survive when the adults cannot? Drop a comment and tell me, because I want to know. What do you think gave these children the strength to endure? Women also became defenders. In the absence of men, who were often away fighting, trading, or killed in earlier raids, women took up tools and turned them into weapons. There are accounts of women using farming implements, kitchen knives, even boiling water to defend their homes. They were not trained warriors, but they were not helpless either. One story from Denmark tells of a woman named Ragnhild who barricaded herself and several other women inside a longhouse when Vikings attacked. The raiders tried to force the door, but Ragnhild and the others pushed heavy furniture against it. When the Vikings tried to burn them out, the women doused the flames with water stored inside. The siege lasted hours. Eventually, the Vikings gave up and moved on. Ragnhild and the women survived. It was not a great victory. It was not celebrated in songs, but it was survival, and that was enough. Another survival tactic was negotiation. Some women, especially those with wealth, status, or knowledge, were able to negotiate with Viking leaders. They offered tribute, food, silver, anything to spare their families. It was humiliating, it was risky, but it sometimes worked. Vikings were pragmatic. If they could get what they wanted without a fight, they often took the deal. In one account from Francia, a noblewoman named Gisela negotiated the release of several captured villagers by offering the Vikings a chest of silver and a supply of salted fish. The Vikings took the payment and left. Gisela was criticized by some for dealing with pagans, but the people she saved did not care. They were alive because she had the courage to face the enemy and bargain for their lives. But the most heartbreaking stories are of the women who were taken and enslaved. Thousands of women from Britain, Ireland, and Francia were captured and transported to Scandinavia, where they were sold in slave markets or forced to work on farms. Some were treated brutally. Some found ways to integrate, to survive, to build new lives in captivity. Archaeological evidence shows that many of these women were buried in Scandinavia, far from their homes, their grave goods marking them as foreign. They lived and died as slaves, forgotten by their own people, remembered only as objects in Viking graves. But some escaped. Some fought back. Some found allies. And some, after years of captivity, were ransomed or freed and made the long journey home. Their stories are rare, but they exist. One Irish text describes a woman named Deirdre who was captured as a teenager, enslaved for 7 years, and eventually escaped by stealing a small boat and rowing across the sea back to Ireland. She was never the same. The trauma marked her. But she survived, and she told her story so that others would know. Children who were captured faced similar horrors. Some were raised as slaves. Some were adopted into Viking families and raised as Norse. Some forgot their original language, their original culture, their original identity. But some never forgot. And some, when they grew old enough, tried to return. There is a saga that mentions a man who, as an old warrior, revealed that he had been born in Ireland, captured as a boy, and raised as a Viking. He never saw his mother again. He never knew if she survived. But he remembered her face. He remembered her voice. And he carried that memory until the day he died. These stories are almost unbearable, but they are real. And they remind us that survival is not always triumph. Sometimes survival is just endurance. Sometimes it is living with loss, with trauma, with the weight of what was taken from you. And that too is courage. Now let me tell you about the women who became leaders. In some communities, when the men were killed or taken, women stepped into leadership roles. They organized defenses. They coordinated evacuations. They made decisions about when to fight and when to flee. History does not record their names as often as it should, but the evidence is there. In Ireland, there are references to women who led clans in the absence of male heirs. In England, there are accounts of abbesses who fortified monasteries and protected their communities. These women were not warriors in the traditional sense, but they were strategists, protectors, survivors. One of the most famous is Ethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, who ruled a kingdom in England during the early 900s. She fortified towns, built defensive structures, and led armies against Viking invasions. She was a widow, a mother, and a ruler who refused to be a victim. Her story is well known, but there were countless other women, unnamed and unrecorded, who did the same on a smaller scale, in villages and farms, protecting their families and communities with nothing but their wits and their will. If you are still with me, if these stories are hitting you in the chest, then let me ask you one more time. What would you have done? If you were a mother in 841 AD and the Vikings came, what choice would you make? Would you hide? Would you fight? Would you run? Think about it. Really think about it. And then tell me in the comments, because these are not just historical questions. These are moral questions. These are human questions. There is also the reality of trauma. The women and children who survived Viking raids did not just go back to normal life. They carried scars, physical and emotional, for the rest of their lives. Children who hid in darkness developed fears that never left them. Women who were taken and returned were often shunned, seen as tainted or broken. The trauma was passed down through generations, woven into the fabric of communities, shaping cultures and identities in ways we are only beginning to understand. But there was also resilience. There was rebuilding. There was the refusal to let the violence define them. Women remarried, children grew up, villages were rebuilt. Life somehow continued. And that continuation, that stubborn insistence on moving forward, is its own kind of heroism. Let me bring this into the present, because the lessons from these women and children are not locked in the past. They speak to us now. We live in a world where women and children are still the primary victims of violence, of war, of displacement. The faces have changed, the weapons have changed, but the dynamics are the same. The vulnerable are targeted, the innocent suffer, and survival depends on the same qualities it did in the Viking Age: courage, adaptability, community, and the refusal to give up. These women did not have social services, they did not have police, they did not have therapists or support groups. They had each other, they had their knowledge, they had their determination, and that was enough. Not to prevent the suffering, but to survive it. Not to avoid the trauma, but to carry it and still move forward. So what does that mean for us? It means that when we face our own crises, our own moments of vulnerability, we have a choice. We can be paralyzed by fear, or we can act. We can hide and hope, or we can lead and protect. We can give up, or we can endure. The women and children of the Viking Age made those choices every single day, and we carry their legacy. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think about strength, about survival, about what it means to protect the ones you love, then I need you to share this video. Not because it helps the channel, though it does, but because these stories deserve to reach people. They deserve to be told. They deserve to be remembered, and the more people who hear them, the stronger we all become. Let me end with one final story. There was a woman, her name unknown, who lived in a village on the coast of Scotland. She had lost her husband to a Viking raid. She had lost one of her children, but she had 2 daughters left, and she was determined to keep them safe. Every night she made them practice hiding. Every morning she taught them how to forage, how to navigate, how to survive without her. And one day, when the Vikings came again, she put her plan into action. She hid her daughters in a sea cave, covered the entrance with driftwood and seaweed, and then walked back to the village. She knew the Vikings would come. She knew they would take her, and she let them. Because as long as they took her, they would not search further. They would not find her daughters. She was taken. She never returned. But her daughters survived. They grew up. They had families of their own. And they told the story of their mother, the woman who traded her life for theirs, the woman whose name is lost, but whose sacrifice is eternal. That is the legacy of the women and children of the Viking Age. That is the power of love, of courage, of the refusal to let evil win. They did not defeat the Vikings, but they survived them. And in that survival, they won. Thank you for walking through this history with me. Thank you for honoring these forgotten voices. If this video gave you something, hit the like button. If you want to keep exploring the truths that history hides, subscribe to English Mindset and turn on notifications. Because we are building something here, a space where the voiceless are heard, where the forgotten are remembered, where the past teaches us how to live. The women and children of the Viking Age could not write their own stories, but we can tell them. We can make sure they are never forgotten. We can make sure their courage, their sacrifice, their resilience lives on. And that is what we do here. That is why English Mindset exists. To remember, to learn, to honor. I will see you in the next story.